Unlocking cyber knowledge one episode at a time. This is Gnosis by Smart Comply Academy.
Today, we are crafting the rule book. We are going to be looking at how to develop your information security policies. Olushola Oyikola hosting as always, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to episode 6 of the I Spent 7,000 Word podcast. Sheyi, great to have you again, and can we go ahead to lay down the law?
Yes, please. Nice to have me, Shola. Thank you so much.
All right, great. Let's get right into it. So the first thing that I would like us to take a look at is why is it so important to have a well-defined information security policy in the context of ISO 7000 Word compliance?
Yeah, so it actually really helps you to be able to, it's more like a preparation of what you should do actually when secure or when issues tend to arise. So it's referred to as more of our document, how we intend to do things within the organization. That's what your policies tend to do. So it provides you with a direction of how the organization will respond to specific type of issues or specific type of incidents, or depending on the type of policy that is being created. But it doesn't give you a step-by-step approach as to how the organization wants to do it. So those type of documents will be your guideline. Your procedural documents will give you this kind of step-by-step approach on how to attempt specific things. But your policy just gives you how.
You mentioned that it doesn't provide us with a step-by-step approach, but then
Yes.
These are procedures, these are processes. Does it mean that it doesn't outline the steps to follow when it comes to implementing the controls?
It doesn't provide you with the steps to follow. It just provides you with what the scope of the policy, what the policy is all about. It provides you with the key roles and responsibilities, the particular control that policy is meant to adopt. Okay, so it doesn't give you the step by step, like go here, click here, all those kind of things. It doesn't provide you with that kind of information. It just tells you how the organizations tend to respond. Especially if you're looking at a system-based type of policy, for example, that speaks to, let's say, incident response, for example, it won't tell you. It just tells you these are communication channels. This is how we should respond. This kind of incident. This is a communication channel. If this requires an incident, then follow this. Proceed to the next step. But it doesn't tell you, disconnect the cable or go ahead and maybe disconnect the particular incident or particular device from the internet. It doesn't give you the step-by-step process, but it tells you how the organization tends to respond to those kind of incidents. I'm just using that as an example. Policy just gives you a hub as to what should be done.
But when crafting all of these policies and procedures, what are the steps that we are expected to follow, and why is each of those steps? Why are they important when it comes to crafting the policies?
So first thing, when you have to draft a policy, first thing is that you need to have management support. Management support is very critical to your policy formations. And also you also need to interact with cross-functional teams depending on the type of policy you're trying to create. And then your policy should also have a structure as well. The structure includes the scope of the policy, the control the policy is trying to address, the key roles and responsibilities, the management authorization, so to speak, as to how the policy is going to be, who's signing this policy, when was the last time this policy reviewed. So those kind of structures that needs to be followed, especially when you're trying to create a security policy for the organization. But the most important thing is management support, because management will be the one to sign off that policy into the company's overall policies document. So it's policies document needs to be managed or supported by management.
By the management.
Yeah,
that's very much understandable. Are there any other steps that we are expected to follow for drafting the policies? Perhaps defining the scope, maybe the purpose for each of the policies, and also you mentioned that we have to ensure that we consult the stakeholders, or probably the experts from the various teams that we have. How is this process meant to be followed? Because I think we earlier on discussed about the RACI matrix, where there is who is responsible, who is accountable, who is to be consulted, and who is to be informed. So in this scenario, let's say I'm going to be drafting, say, a network security policy, for example, and I am an ISMS manager. right? And would it mean that I would be responsible for creating these policies, but then I can consult the lead engineer or maybe somebody from engineering? So what exactly is this process meant to be like?
Yeah, so in that kind of scenario, your network security, your information security manager should be the one actually accountable for the policy. Because if you're writing an information security policy that is network oriented, for example, your network security consultant or your network security manager might not be so totally inclined with network security policy. Fine, might have an understanding of how it should look like. But in terms of the technicalities involved, so let's say, for example, you're trying to look at what type of encryption policy should we use, especially if you're communicating for VPN, you're terminating VPN connectivity between two different partners, the hashing algorithm might not be so technically inclined. However, the network security manager should be responsible for writing that policy, but the information security manager will definitely be accountable for that particular policy. So in overall, the network security manager will also review it and then sign it and say, okay, it's actually good to go before management will have to give a final approval for that particular policy. So in that kind of scenario, the subject matter expert will be responsible for taking a lead on that particular policy, but your information security manager will definitely be accountable for the overall policy writing of policy process as well.
Thank you very much for that. And ISO 27001/2022 provides us with some specific documentation requirements that we are expected to work on. And if you are able to outline some of these requirements and the purpose in the ISMS framework, I think that would be very much enlightening.
Okay, so the ISO standard itself has 10 clauses, as we've spoken about in the entire series, and each of those clauses they use a shall statement, a shall verb, when writing those policies and those particular clauses. What it means is that they are mandatory. So anything in those 10 clauses, it's mandatory. So when a security auditor wants to review your your certification process or wants to help you to get certified for the first time, you need to have those policies in those 10 clauses needs to be there. So one of them, you need to have your ISMS policy that speaks to the entire overall process of your ISMS in general. You also need to have your statement of applicability, which is very important, incident management response, your risk management plan. Which other one again needs to be there? A couple of those type of policies, those type of documents needs to be available. But the overall process is that you need to have those mandatory clauses. You need to have your ready-made you need to have your document that allows that each of those mandatory clauses have been dealt with during the process. And then another thing again that helps organization when it comes to writing policies is that it's a painstaking task actually though when it comes to writing. So what some organizations do, they just go ahead to purchase policies, ready-made policies that have already been written by ISO, not ISO itself, but that tailored towards ISO. So there are some organizations out there that provide those policies in bulk for ISMS compliance. So they have your project charter document, your risk management plan, your incident response plan, or all of those different documents. I can't remember some of them off the top of my head, but all of those different documents you need to have, they already have them as a template. So all you just need to do is to modify them and tailor them to suit your own organization. So it saves you ample time, having to, write it from scratch. So I've seen organizations, go through that approach instead of having to sit down and write it. So it will save them a couple of time. And then you get to that. So that's another way you can also go about it.
Thank you very much for that. And for those that are drafting some of these policies, I think I would like us to take a look at how can they structure these policies to maximize clarity and usability, and are there any templates or best practices that they are expected to follow?
Can you say that part again, please?
Sorry,
I'm saying, can you say that part again?
Okay, so what I was saying was that for those that will be drafting these policies,
Yes.
Is there a particular structure that they are expected to follow to maximize clarity and usability? And if there are any templates or best practices that they are expected to follow to ensure that, yes, they can communicate this information in a clear manner?
So one of the ways to do that is to follow the well-known template, and that structure actually requires you to have your purpose at first. Sorry, I don't know. Give me 1 second. I have to cut this place out. So my computer just locked up, so I couldn't see you.
Yes.
So that kind of question, one of the things that happens is to follow the structure of your policy. So your policy should definitely have a scope. What scope is this policy meant to cover? You also need to have the purpose for the policy. You also have to have the control that the policy is trying to address. Okay, and then key roles and responsibilities as well also needs to be there. Management review in terms of revision of that particular policy, that the table that provides you when the policy was written, when the policy was reviewed, we reviewed the policy, and then the signature as well should also be there. So document control. Yeah, so those reviews, those structure is what you would have in those are the basic you should have in your policy. Because when you're reviewing the policy, you also have to review to ensure that all of those different functionalities are also there in the policy as well. So those are the structures that you should have, that your policy should have. But however, depending on the type of regularity of the policy, you might also want to add maybe additional, additional headings to your policy. Maybe you want to write the communication channel, or you want to write, especially if you're writing a communication plan, for example, you might want to add some specific other headings to it. But the basic headings you must always have is the purpose, the scope, the key responsibilities, and also you must also have the document control at the basic, when you're complying, when you're putting your policy together.
Thank you very much. And is this structure provided by the ISO 27001 framework, or should we say that they are just best practices? And also, would you say that all of these informations, just like you had mentioned, the document control, you have to identify the scope, the purpose, are all of these informations compulsory to have in the document? Or can I just go ahead to outline what are some of those policies, what are some of those controls that we are trying to implement, what are the issues, what are the risks we are trying to address, and then ensure that I also pass that information across to the rest of the team? Is it important that I follow this structure? Is the structure provided by the ISO 27001 framework, or is it a best practice?
Well, it's from ISO point of view. ISO provides you with what you should have in your policy. So it doesn't tell you how you should write your policies, but it defines it with the specific terms you should have in your policy, because those are the things that would also be looked against when you're trying to write your policy, or when you're trying to review your policy, if it's in conformity with the ISO standard as well. So it's part of the requirement that you should have them. However, it doesn't tell you what you should write, how you should write your policy, but it puts those headings of what you should have in your policy as well. So, and also from a best practice point of view, it's the thing about your policy is that your policy should also be very, very clear and very, very specific. So depending on the type of policy you're writing, if it's a system specific policy or issue based or issue specific policy, it will also require you to have putting specific headings there. So like what I've mentioned, like the purpose, the scope, all those ones are mandatory that you should have in your policy. However, you can also include additional headings in those policies, so that it makes your policy pretty much clear, so that anyone who is reading would have a proper understanding of what the policy is meant and the purpose of the policy. Yes.
Thank you very much for that. And I think I would also like us to take a look at how organizations can effectively integrate their information security policies with their ISMS controls, because yes, definitely there are some organizations that would already have existing policies and they are looking into implementing the ISO 27001 framework. What are the steps to integrate this particular framework or control into their existing security policies that they have within their environment?
So in this place, they will have to do like a gap analysis to actually look at, okay, where are we right now with our policies, and what should be the desired state for us, especially from a policy point of view. So looking at the controls, because of the updated number of controls, the new additional controls that's added, and also reducing it from 114 to 90 to 93, if I'm not mistaken, is that you also have to review that this policy, looking at the controls that exist in the 2020, in the latest version, which of the control applies to this particular policy. Because if you write a policy that is not using the old controls, and that control now doesn't exist in the new 2022, then it makes it null and void. So you have to review the controls and also review the policy. So you also have to look at which control matches this particular policy that we're writing, and then ensure that you have it included in your policy.
With different types of controls. I mean, we have physical controls, we have the organizational controls. How are you supposed to align these security policies to the organizational controls from the ISO 7001, for example? I mean, what's the connection, and how do we differentiate the policies?
So it depends on the type of policy that you're writing. So if you're writing a policy that has to do with access control, for example, then what it means is what you're doing is the control you have to be looking at is the under technical controls. And the way ISO writes it is that it writes them according to the clauses. So you have it as A5, A6, A7, I think A9 or thereabout. So you have all of those different controls. However, the type of policy you're writing will also you have to map it to the control that the policy is trying to address as well. So now in the category, it now depends on, okay, this type of policy is going to be categorized under organizational control, because organizational controls would have to depend on the type of policy you're writing, that is organization or maybe HR-based policy. You know that, okay, the control that will be applied to this is going to be more of organizational. So you won't be looking at you won't be trying to put a technical control into an organizational based type of policy. So it's about just understanding all the controls and know the type of policy you want to write, and then map them accordingly.
Thank you very much. So we have been able to draft our policies, and then the next step would be to ensure that we obtain the approval, and then we can communicate these policies to the respective employees. But what strategies can we put in place to ensure that employees understand and adhere to these policies that we have been able to come up with?
Okay, I think one of the best things to do is to convert your policy into a process. One of the things I've observed is that there are a lot of documentations out there, or policy-based policies in your organization, that how many people usually go back there to say they want to go with the policy? It's quite difficult, because people don't usually like reading those type of documents. It's only when they need advice that they say, okay, before we act, let's see what does the policy say on this type of issues, so that we're not violating the company policy. Okay, so but one of the ways that can make it more easier is to translate your policy into operational processes. So it makes it easier if people know this as a process than when they're trying to, rack their brain or look at it from a policy point of view. So once you translate some of this into a process, it becomes easier for people to, understand it more. And then what other organizations also do is that they have a SharePoint whereby they have all of those policies for easy accessibility by all their employees. So probably they have an intranet whereby they communicate it to the organization, communicate it to all the staff as to where they can get the policies, where they can read the policy, where they can access the policies. Some also use policy management solutions to have those policies all documented, and then if it's updated, it's all populated there as well. So it's more of communication. So different approach. Some use banners, some use different communication channels, emails, blogs, just to communicate to their employees as to the importance of security policies and where they can also go, view this policy for their own personal understanding.
Thank you very much. And does that also in any way relate to the awareness campaigns that are usually conducted for employees? And I think there are some situations where organizations also run simulations just to ensure that yes, the employees are following the best practices when it comes to responding to some of these incidents. And does that have anything to do with ensuring that yes, these policies that we have been able to document, they are properly understood, and the employees are taking the proper controls, and they are making use of it in their day-to-day activities?
Yeah, what you said are some strategies that some organizations tend to. But the thing about strategy again is, fine, even though they are best practice, you also have to look at your own organization. You have to adapt, whatever strategy or action you want to use to your own organization, because every organization is actually very peculiar. Some organizations are good at ensuring that everybody, based on how the culture of the organization, because it's also tied to your organizational culture actually. So the culture allows, if the culture is properly defined, that allows people to have access to information where they can go, and then they communicate it. Probably maybe they have their stand-up meeting, they drum those information to their employees. It becomes much more it becomes something that they know based on repetition that okay, this policy has this, we need to go back and read them. So for me as a person, I can't really remember the last time I went to say okay, I want to go with the security policy, or I want to go with the policy. But if that policy is translated into operational process, and those processes actually communicated, it becomes easier, because okay, before I do this is how this works, that is how that works, rather than leaving people to just go read the document before they can know what to do. So sometimes I think what I would suggest is the best practice is translate your policy into an operational process, and then it becomes easier for people to understand what to do, especially when it comes to policies as well.
Thank you very much. Can I take you back a bit? I think I would like us to talk about the ownership and responsibility, which is actually very much important for any policy success. And I would like us to talk about how the organization should assign these roles to the various people who are expected to get them done within their environment.
Okay, so most of the time is that information, that type of responsibilities usually lies more with the information security manager, though, because is always responsible, accountable for ensuring that security policies are actually properly written and also communicated to the employees as well. So when you're conducting, or when you want to implement, because when you're implementing the ISMS, when you want to implement ISO 27001 for an organization, you also have to define roles and responsibilities. So knowing your roles, knowing who is supposed to handle what, your information security manager, your ISMS champions, your asset owners, all of the stakeholders that need to be involved. Once their role is defined from the inception, it becomes quite very much easier to know, okay, who is handling this, who is defined. And that's what happens during the project charter, project initiation phase, where you have those conversations as who is supposed to manage this, who is reporting to this, where are we going to get this information from, who's going to be accountable, responsible, consulted, and informed on this type of task. So primarily when it comes to policies, it's the primary owner or person who is actually responsible, or sometimes is accountable in ensuring that those policies are adequately documented, who's supposed to write the policy, who's managing it, and all of those kind of stuff.
Thank you very much for that. I think this has been very well enlightening for us. And finally, evolving all of these policies to address emerging challenges, trends, and just to ensure that our security policies are up to date, and we are able to also mitigate any sort of information security challenges within our environment.
Yeah. I think one of the first things to do is to ensure that each of your policy is tied to your ISMS control. So if you're writing a policy that is maybe issue specific or system specific, you need to tie it to the policy. So you need to tie it to the appropriate control, so that the policy is actually very concise, because now you know that this policy is meant to address this particular control. And then another thing again is also communication. Communication is very important. There are a couple of policies that it's just lying there within organizations that even employees are not aware of. So ensure that the employees are aware of policies. Communicating policies effectively is also very very important. So sometimes you might want to do banners or send out internet emails, just to ensure that people are aware. Or you set up a policy week. You can do an information security policy week within your organization, or a policy awareness.
Yes.
And then you walk through, specific policy that they need to know. Maybe HR policy, policy that has to do with specific issues, maybe access control policies. Specific policies, security-oriented policies, or security awareness. Type of event would also help organizations or employees be aware of some of these policies, and then they can point them to where they can also get those policies for them to further, review and understand it. And then, for policy, when it comes to policy, one thing that's also important is stakeholder involvement. So as I mentioned before, is that when you're writing policy, it's not a one-man show when it comes to writing. Unless it's just a policy that is specific to your particular domain. It's also important to involve specific subject matter experts so that your policy covers all specific areas. So if you're writing something that has to do with HR, for example, or that addresses employees, you have to look at things around privacy and policy. You have to look at things around privacy. You have to look at things around human rights laws to ensure that the whatever you're writing in the policy also matches with those kind of laws. And then you also have to define key roles and responsibilities in your policies. So who is supposed to handle what? Who will be responsible for this kind of thing? So if you're looking at things around incident, for example, you have to look at what do we communicate when we identify an incident, who is responsible, where are we going to communicate that particular incident? Are we sending it to the IT department? Which email should we send it to? So those type of clear ownership and responsibility is also very important. And then your policy should be reviewed. It's not a one-time policy you write and then you leave it there. You need to consistently review it. So sometimes once it's months, but at least before your next certification, you should also review your policy as well, and then also ensure your policy has a standardization in terms of its structure, how it looks like. And some people also have a policy management solution. Those policies are stored, and you can consistently, you have a system in place. And whenever you update those policies, they're properly kept, and then they're properly reviewed and all of that. So you can track the progress in terms of review of those policies as well. So these are some of the best practices when it comes to policy management.
Thank you very much for that. I would also like to ask you, how are these policies meant to be considered in the performance evaluation and monitoring process? I think that's speaking to plus 9. And how are we supposed to, we must have been able to identify areas of non-conformities and areas where we need to also ensure that we improve, and also are we also expected to adapt these policies to these areas where we have been able to identify gaps?
Yes, definitely. Once you're running your gap analysis, your policies will also be involved in those processes, because now the consultant that is helping you go through that process will also review all of your policies and see where the gaps are. So it provides you with continuous improvement as to, okay, this is the area where you should improve on. These are the areas that doesn't conform to the standard in terms of how the policy should look like. So they provide you with that information, and then you can use that to consistently, modify your policies, review your policy, and also have it documented as well. So once it's reviewed, the last time it was reviewed needs to be dated, and also who reviewed that policy as well also needs to be dated as well. So it's important that those kind of things need to be documented, when you're doing your performance evaluation as well.
Thank you very much, Oluwaseyi. That was very informative. And developing effective policies is actually very much essential. And you've been able to give us a great foundation. And if you have any questions about policy development, please ask them in the comments. And remember to like, subscribe, and share this episode. And if you want to learn more about building strong security policies, please head over to academy.smartcomply.com and check out Smart Comply Academy's offerings. This is Gnosis by Smart Comply Academy, unlocking cyber knowledge one episode at a time. I'm Olushola. See you in the next episode. Bye for now.